Record on this computer. Okay, so yeah, before we get on with our debate, let's have a little talk about wealth inequality, something we hadn't done last class. And my question to you right now is, which is worse, which is larger, wealth inequality or income inequality in this country? I can't die.
I'd say wealth.
You'd say wealth? Do people agree with him? Joseph says wealth. You can see on my slides right now, I'm saying, do you think wealth inequality is more extreme or less extreme than income? And you're saying more extreme, right? Anybody disagree? Wealth for sure, Camila says in the chat. Nick says wealth. Yeah, let's take a look. It's definitely more extreme, the wealth. This is kind of what distributions of family wealth looked like back in 2016, where this axis is the family's wealth, and this goes all the way up to the billions, right? Here, this is just 10 million. It would have to be not 10 times larger, but 100 times larger than this line right here. Imagine this distance here, but times 100. That's how high it goes into the billions. And in fact, some people are in the tens of billions now. It just goes enormously high. And so very few of the people in terms of percentile are up in that range, that high. And so many are quite low. In fact, many are negative. So what are the red? The red here represents people with negative net worth, net wealth. It means that they owe more than they have. Their debts are greater than their assets. That's what that means. Okay, so of course it's worse. It's hard to even talk about what a Gini coefficient for wealth is. You don't report wealth to the IRS. It's hard to measure, and it wouldn't even hardly even make sense to talk about it. It's just so extreme, right? So rather than trying to quantify wealth inequality, we can talk about what are some of the causes of it. Intergenerational mobility could be a big cause. And that's why we have the Great Gatsby curve. US is in the far upper right. That means high income inequality, high wealth inequality, and high lack of intergenerational mobility. Sorry. There's this one video that was like popular almost 10 years ago, and I think probably maybe some of you have seen it already, but it's just a way to visualize some stuff about wealth inequality. I figured maybe you don't mind if I share it with you right now. If you've already seen it, I apologize, and it's going to be boring to you. But it's this guy, and he's kind of got an odd way of talking, but here's some guy talking about wealth inequality in America. I know why I want to show this to you. It's to talk to you about how Americans think about wealth inequality. That's what this video will say something about. Hopefully you can see it. Can you hear it?
A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups. They asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting—
That guy's adding a little bit of his own editorial input here. That's skewed unfairly. It didn't say anything about unfairly. This is just a survey. You guys hear me right now? You see the graph and hear me? It's just a survey that says, what do you think the distribution of wealth is? And I should say this particular survey only gave you certain choices. Like it showed you different distributions, and it said, okay, now pick the one that you think America is really like. And this was the median selection, right? Most people on average thought this was what the distribution was. And then I ask you, okay, of these, which one do you think is the most ideal? It didn't give you every possible choice. It just gave you some choices. And among the choices, actually a large number, 92% thought this was ideal. That's kind of striking, I think. You never get 92% of any of people to agree on anything. Like, was Obama born in Kenya? The answer is no, but you couldn't get 92% of people in this country to say no to the question, was Obama born in Kenya? And so this is actually very high. It almost makes me not believe it. Like, really, 92%? That's what they said. Chose this as their ideal distribution of wealth. And then obviously what this guy is going to show us is what the real thing is, and what they think it is, what their ideal distribution is, and what it actually is very, very different, as you'll see. Okay, I'll go.
Interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution, shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart, but the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally.
That's not socialism, guy. He knows that too. He's got a straw man argument here to say that this is socialism. Nobody really thinks that's socialism. At least nobody serious.
We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own because he won't fit on my chart.
Let's just stop there. Okay, so the guy's trying to make the point that there actually is a lot of wealth inequality in this country, even more than people realize. And in particular, the 1% had those multiple stacks of dollar bills. But like all problems, you have to think, what could we do about it? What's the alternative? And I don't think we as a society really know what to do about it. A lot of people may say, yeah, I don't want this extreme wealth inequality to be happening. I certainly don't want it to get worse. That video is from 2012. So 8 years later, it's only gotten worse. The Gini coefficient has gone up a little bit since then. And yeah, so maybe today's debate will have just a little bit to say about what do we do to people for people at the bottom who just seem to not be able to accumulate wealth or so it's hard to say, like, how poor are the poor people in this country. I think that's a subjective question that we could all ask ourselves. Is it um, you know certainly if you compare the poorest people in this country compared to the developing world, people who earn less than $2 per day, I think there's still something like 1 billion people who earn less than $2 per day. It's sort of mind blowing what sort of poverty still exists on a global scale. And so, I'm not saying the bottom 20% of income earners in this country are the biggest priority. As a humanitarian goal is to bring those people out of poverty, when you can just as easily say to me, what about the rest of the world, and what can we do to help those people? That's a very good question, and it's not what I'm asking. I'm just thinking about what sort of changes or systemic properties of the current economy of the United States are leading to this extreme wealth inequality, and what can we do as Americans about it? And that's, I think the universal basic income has a little bit to say about that. It would probably be taxed much more heavily on the high income earners. Wouldn't you say, Mihak? Probably the people who will end up paying for a UBI would be um, the top income earners, right?
Yeah, there is some chance that the people who would be paying for it would be high income earners, but there are some like other sources of UBI as well.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll talk about that. Let me just put up this slide here, which is just I don't know, some of my crazy thoughts about it. Income inequality. Yeah, a progressive tax system, some people say, would try to have less inequality, at least once you consider the transfers. There's a Warren Buffett rule that says basically a minimum tax rate for the wealthiest Americans. They can't find any way, so it basically takes away any sort of loophole that they could use to lower their tax burden. That's what the Warren Buffett rule would be. You could also think about putting limits on executive pays. Right now, CEOs make 300 times their average employee. It used to only be 20 times their average employee, but CEO, that's chief executive officers, have had their compensation packages just grow really fast. And maybe legislators could say something about that, even though that is a distortion in the free market, right? Something to think about. Like, I don't know. What do you guys think about that? And then, of course, universal basic income. I don't know. These are just some simple ideas. I'd rather just let the debaters talk about it, unless you guys have any questions or comments about wealth inequality. I don't have a lot to say. Most of what I had to say was about income inequality, not wealth. We have our debate on UBI. The first, I usually let the presenter go first, and then than the against presenter. What were you guys, what's your pre-debate opinion on this? Should the United States have a universal basic income? Tell me in the chat. Against, okay. Ooh. 0 and 2 now against. 0 and 3. 0 and 4, 0 and 5. 6. Wow. Everyone's against it. Mihak, you're gonna have a, everyone's either undecided or against. No one has been for. Would anybody have been more willing to do this if I hadn't put that clause in there about and drastically change the welfare? If we thought just keep the welfare system and add a UBI, would that have made anybody more likely to want the UBI?
Probably not. It's for me, no, because
Okay.
it's still half of the. Well, no. Sorry, it's still like 1/4 of our annual budget, though.
Yeah. So, gosh, I mean, it looks like the class is overwhelmingly against this idea. That's okay. I wanted an issue that maybe people would have take both sides on. It seems like most people are against it, but let's give the floor to Mihak if she's ready. Are you ready to go, Mihak? You should be a co-host already,
Yeah,
which means you
ready.
can share your screen.
Just a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know how to do it?
Yeah.
On
I
Zoom?
don't know
Okay.
how to do it. Just a minute.
Yeah. Peter, you can be getting yourself ready to go too. She's going to tell us about some case studies also. Maybe there's one in Alaska, in California, Mexico. So I'm looking forward to it.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, now it says universal basic income on the screen.
Yeah. Okay.
Mihak Chopra,
Okay,
Econ 300.
I'm ready to present.
Okay.
Alright. Sorry, I'm a little anxious, like a little nervous now. Okay, I'll do my best.
You'll do great.
Okay, so I am presenting about universal basic income. And so what is universal basic income? Universal basic income is a guaranteed, no strings attached, reoccurring payment to every member of the society, sized to meet the basic needs. And currently that value would be around 12,880 as set by HHS poverty guidelines for 2021. And it approaches the problem of people of not having enough to live on by giving everyone a check equal to the cost of living. In its fullest form, universal universal basically means serving all the members of society. Basic means enough to cover the basic needs, and income is unconditional, reoccurring payment guaranteed for guaranteed recipients for a lifetime. So the first question that might come to your mind is how UBI would be funded. There are various ways to fund UBI. The most popular ones are taxes. The first one is VAT, value added tax on corporation business transactions to gain money from big corporations like Amazon and Uber, who somehow manage to get around the system by using their growth-based business models and very clever accounting. And another proposed tax is 0.1% levied tax on transactions, on all kind of transactions. This might seem like a really small tax, but when you compare it to the transactions that occur in big corporations, it is a really big, significant amount of tax. And then there are other kind of taxes proposed like carbon tax and land tax and other taxes that we saw in the presentation that are about taxing the rich people. And Another way to pay for UBI is repealing or reducing other benefits provided by the government right now. So what is the rationale to support UBI? Promising The first thing that UBI promises is to eliminate monetary poverty, as it would set a base level for everyone, as it would provide some basic income to everyone. And the second is empowering people to choose their profession and future. I've done some case studies on Finland. I mean, not me, like there were some case studies done on Finland and Ontario, Canada, and other countries as well. And it clearly shows that people feel more empowered to choose their professions and even decide if they need to go back to education and gain more skills. It showed that it improved their mental health. They spent more time with their family. They were more happy. And being a supporter of UBI, I believe that universal cash benefits from the government would at least address one of the three policy dilemmas. One is economic inequality, technology replacing human workers, and transfer program inefficiencies. So the Gini coefficient for US right now is 0.434 compared to the other countries, as you might be able to see. This research is done by the Pew Research Center, which is a non-partisan American think tank based on Washington, D.C. And it clearly shows that America does need to improve a lot based on its economic inequality. And these are this slide shows the rising gap in wealth between the upper income and middle lower income families. These are all the wealth distributions in 1983, 2001, and 2016. Having UBI would eliminate income inequality as it would have a floor of wealth to rise from for the poor. And also it was tested in India on a group of 20 villages, and 8 villages were kept aside, which were not given universal basic income. And the results were very positive. The health improved, the kids' performance in school increased by 68%. Families saved 3 times more than what they usually would have saved. The poverty reduced and schooling and healthcare improved, and the new businesses in the area doubled. And similarly, in Uganda as well, job opportunities increased by some really good percentage. Another advantage of UBI is it would provide cushion for the job that are at risk due to an automation or artificial intelligence. The global average for our job risk is 57% for the near future. And this is the risk profile for different section of people in USA. Our jobs are also like demand and supply. If the companies find cheap and better labor in the form of robots or AI, they are most likely to switch. And they are expected to take 57% of the human jobs in the near future. We have to come up with ways to keep people afloat, and UBI seems to be one of the best options. It would provide them an opportunity to have a basic living or even some money to gain more skills. And in the trial on Finland, it was clearly shown that their productivity increased, although their unemployment rate was not affected significantly. So exploring the budget neutral UBI, what happens if we repeal most of the tax provisions and repeal most of the welfare and transfer programs? A study was done in 2017, a study was done by the American Enterprise Institute by different economists, and they came to the conclusion that if all these programs were repealed, then for the people who are 18 years old or older would get around $13,788. per year, and for people under the age of 18 would get $6,894. It seems pretty good, and this is the price for 2020. So the basic result of that study was that it's most effective for most of the class of the people, except for the people at the extreme end. The scenario clearly shows that most of the middle class is certainly better off with UBI in place and repealing most of the other policies. There are some loopholes in it, like people on the ends are not that better off, but the problem can easily be solved by having some kind of additional policy, or maybe not revoking all of the current existing policies. And now the effect of UBI on major US economy. So firstly, inflation. A common concern about UBI is that increasing everyone's incomes will result in inflation, but the existing evidence clearly suggests that rampant inflation is unlikely because the supply of most things people spend is not fixed. And in the case study on the state of Alaska, the state of Alaska has given its citizen an annual dividend of between $800 to $2,000 since 1990, and its inflation has lagged the average US inflation. Then coming to inequality, it's clear that UBI raises the floor as it provides people to some basic income for living. And also, once bankrupt town of Stockholm, California, initiated an 18-month experiment in February, distributing checks of around 500 to 130 random selected Stockholm residents. And there was to mitigate poverty and inequality, and it did work there. Coming to debt, it is just, most of the sources that I found related to debt were real sources from 2017, and they said that it would, if UBI is if UBI is implemented, then it would increase 6.8% debt in 8 years and 68% debt in 2027. But the model that they use assumed that UBI would completely be funded by deficit, but UBI is not like an extra funding. And if we repeal some current policies for funding UBI, then it would not have that much significant effect on debt. And last but not the least, coming to GDP, a monthly check of 1,000 delivered to every American adult would grow US economy by roughly 2.5 trillion over 8 years. There are some negative effects of UBI, like people who get UBI get discouraged to work, which is clearly not true because most of the studies show that in countries like Finland, their unemployment rate did not get significantly affected, and inflation, as I said in the previous slide, it's not that high, or it really doesn't like count in this case. And rise in debt, as I said in the previous slide, it's again sorry, I got mixed up, sorry. And also I heard someone saying that UBI would cost around $4 trillion, which is 1/4 of our economy. But according to an economist, okay, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He says that it would cost $531 billion per year. And if we include more taxes like wealth tax and stuff, then it would not be that big of an amount.
Sorry, is that just the net cost after you factor in other things that are it would replace?
Oh,
the saving, because you said it was only 500 billion for UBI for the whole country.
$531 billion per year. After it
Is
was
that,
after.
do you know if that is the net cost of it after you factor in savings?
He said it's the net cost.
Okay.
Yeah,
That sounds right.
It is supposed to be the net cost, yes.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, you have a
These
bunch
are
of
the
it. Yeah,
other like advantages that I stated.
okay.
Should I stop sharing now?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. I guess if anybody has any quick clarifying questions, they could ask them. If not, I think we should let Peter go ahead and give his presentation.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you say it's going to be based on the standard of living?
What exactly are you talking about?
Like, do
She said that something like 12,000 per year was based on somebody's estimates of your basic needs.
well,
Yeah, that was the poverty line thing.
Yeah.
The official state, like the official money that you need for basic living is that much amount of dollars. And
doesn't
it's some government website stated that. That is what I quoted.
but
I
isn't
can
there,
I can put the link in the chat.
but isn't there like a different? Doesn't $12,000 mean different than like California or West Virginia?
Mm,
Like you can't $12,000 will barely get you ice cream in LA.
it's true.
There were different categories in it. I literally just took the average. Yeah.
Well, Joseph, do you think there should be different places would get different amounts?
Like suppose like we had to have it, yeah, because you can't give someone in LA or the San Francisco area $12,000. You might as well just give them nothing.
Well, I can imagine somebody rebutting this by saying you don't have to live in Los Angeles. You don't have to live in New York. If you choose to live in those cities that are very expensive, um, you can't complain about not getting enough benefits from the government, as opposed to somebody who lives in West Virginia where the cost of living is low.
That would only be the sole source of income for people who have no job.
Yeah.
So like the vast majority of
Yeah, no, but I'm agreeing with Joseph in saying, of course, there's huge cost of living differences between New York and West Virginia. But I'm now giving the other side of the argument, which is this is a benefit that we give all Americans. Whether you choose to live in a city with a high cost of living is up to you, but it shouldn't be, you know, because you made this choice to live in New York City. Now your benefits are double the people who didn't make that choice. I could imagine some people saying that's unfair. That's all I'm saying. Maybe we should let Peter go. We'll talk about this later, like how cost of living should be factored into all of this. That's an interesting question. I like that you brought it up. But Peter, do you want to go now?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's hear from Peter about why we should not have a universal basic income.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Peter Ongman and I'm going to be arguing against UBI. So just a basic overview. Generally, if you have a bit too much or a bit too little money going into the program, it can disincentivize work, doesn't really target the people who it needs to, can lead to effects that mitigate the usefulness of what the program's attempting to achieve, and it is incredibly expensive. So in terms of disincentivizing work, if you have too little money, it means it doesn't help those it's designed to. Like say, if you give $500 to someone struggling to meet ends meet or what have you, that $500 will go by almost instantly. It's not going to help all that much, not going to do really anything. But on the flip side, if you give them too much money, then the likelihood that people will want to work significantly decreases. Now, in terms of mitigating effects, if everyone gets universal basic income, as the professor was saying, I believe last class, it's a bit redundant to give $1,000 to the people who are paying for most of UBI. Beyond that, say someone in the upper middle class gets it as well. The marginal propensity to spend within the United States is much higher than in most other countries. So the likelihood that they're going to spend that money is pretty high. But those who don't spend that money will either just put it away or, yeah, essentially just put it away. Now, if everyone who gets UBI but doesn't need it ends up just spending it, we will see an increase in inflation. It might not happen within a year, but over time it will definitely increase. And unless we can get UBI, the amount of money going to each person to increase at the same rate, it will have lessening effects as time goes on. And tied to inflation is the cost of the standard of living. So if inflation increases, like cost of living here in Richmond would go up from, say, like around 1,500 average a month to suddenly everyone knows you've got more money to spend, they're going to start ticking up the price ever so slightly. So in terms of costs, and this is probably the most major point, is that using some numbers from 2012, we had 179 million working adults. And if we gave them about $12,000 a year, this would equate to 2.14 trillion. And that's just giving the money away. That's not including costs of setting up the infrastructure to make sure everyone gets their money in an orderly fashion. Now, if we replaced our current welfare system, we would still be adding roughly 1.2 trillion to our deficit, unless we can find other ways to pay for it. And this only increases as the number of people in the US continues to grow. Now in 2020, the CBO announced the Freedom Dividend would cost around 60% of the 2020 budget. So a lot higher than the 1/4 for the budget that I believe was mentioned earlier. So one of the ideas tossed out is that it promotes equality, but it doesn't really do that if everyone gets it. Because the idea of UBI is to take a bit off the top and give it to those who are really struggling. But if we give everyone that money, have we really evened the playing field? And in terms of future-proofing the economy against automation, things like that, the same thing generally applies. If the $1,000 a month would certainly help people who lose their jobs to automation, but it's only going to go so far, especially if everyone else is getting the same amount. So my general idea, instead of UBI, is that we focus the intended benefits on the lower income brackets who really need it. So this would be like investing more money into programs already in place, like food stamps, TANF, housing assistance. And I forget who mentioned this earlier, but we would need it to be specific to each different locality. I believe there's 3,143 different counties or districts, including DC in the US. And each one has very different needs and very different costs of living. And one way that's measured is with the cost of living index. And generally speaking, the national average is around 100. And New York, 187.2. So you can imagine if you give $1,000, someone here in Richmond, that might be great. That will help them throughout the entire month. $1,000 in New York, that really won't cut it. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to clarify something because you said you had 60% of the budget instead of 25%. But I think Mihak said it was 25% of our economy, not of our budget. That's why they're different. Our budget is smaller than our economy.
Yeah.
GDP.
Yeah. I was just going based off of the CBO report from the past year.
Yeah, I'm saying you could both be right. That this would cost 60% of what our current budget is, and that total could be 25%. Actually, our economy, anyways. Okay, who should we? So I will open up the floor to questions if anyone has them. I specifically want to let Mihak have a chance if she wants to come back to any points that were mentioned just now, or either one of you really. Peter, you can say something about Mihak's. You guys have any comments?
Yeah, I do have like small rebuttals.
Okay.
He said that what's the point of giving UBI if it would be given to everyone? Like if even rich get it and even the poor get it. The rebuttal to that is usually given is that the rich will be taxed more, so their money would automatically like go away, and it's literally the poor and the middle class who are actually getting benefits from it. And that answer to the specific there are specific needs for counties and cities. I think other programs can accommodate for those. Like we can have other programs specific to the counties or the cities that can accommodate for the cost of living or any help that those people need. Universal basic income is a separate idea that is about giving universal income to everyone. Yeah.
Okay. Peter, do you have anything else?
Just to comment on that last part, I think, well, it definitely is a separate measure. The problem is it's all very interconnected, especially because the world has become so globalized.
What's a separate measure? I'm sorry. What do you mean?
UBI in terms of its connection to like, sorry, how did you put it, Mihawk?
Are you talking about the last thing that I just said?
Yeah.
I was just saying that as Joseph mentioned, our cities and specific counties have their own cost of living, which may be higher or lower. So those can be accommodated with special programs specific to those counties or cities. And UBI should remain the same.
So in other words, there's a federal UBI, which everyone gets. And there's also a state or local UBI that you get if you're in a specific locality where the cost of living is higher. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that one way to address this cost of living issue. And I think people would object less to that because, the federal government is collecting taxes from everybody. And it would sort of, people in the heartland, in the middle of America, wouldn't like their tax dollars going to New Yorkers at twice the rate as it's going to themselves. They would I can just tell that they would hate that. But having a separate New York only UBI would mean, okay, fine. If you need your basic needs can't be met just with the federal UBI, but you can have a local one added to it. That'd be one way to address that problem of the cost of living differences. I mean, makes sense to me. Thank you. Anybody else who wrote something in their summaries want to add something? why did you guys think you were either for, most of you were against or undecided? What were the reasons you gave for being against or undecided the UBI? Is there any of them that you wrote about that weren't discussed already?
I also put down, you might as, for certain things, you might as well just have the current welfare stuff, because
Okay.
they would pay more. So, like, the average social security payment is about $1,500. So if you're 65 and older, you might as well just stay with social security.
Yeah. So I think this wouldn't replace Social Security. I don't think so. If you think of Social Security, it's an entitlement that you spend your whole life paying into the Social Security. Therefore, when you reach eligibility age, you're entitled to get that money back to you. And trust me, seniors will not let you take that away. They will be very, very upset if you take that away, because in their defense, they have been paying into it their whole lives. So, it's people your age that I think are most likely to have something happen to you where you're not going to get the money that you put into it. Who knows? I mean, Social Security maybe survives and it'll be fine in 50 years, but it looks like it might be in a lot of trouble going forward. But just to say, I don't think UBI would replace Social Security. I don't think so. Nick, did you have a comment?
Also,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying that also there have been some programs like some UBI pilot programs that have been tested just for elderly. So like that program might be one way to replace some, maybe not Social Security, but other like retirement programs
Yeah,
that are there. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I think we should talk more about Alaska, because Peter brought this up. You said it. You talked about inflation, Peter. You said if we give everybody UBI, that's going to give people more money. They're going to spend that money. Prices are going to go up. Cost of living is going to go up. It might actually be bad for us in the long run because of all this inflation. But Alaska has been paying its citizens for decades now. They have. They get free money if you live in Alaska. It's because of the oil revenues that they have there. There was some legislation Alaska built that said, okay, fine, you can drill this oil, but we want to take some of that money and give it back to the citizens, and they did. And it hasn't caused inflation to increase faster in Alaska than it has in the rest of the country. Now, of course, there isn't such a thing as an Alaskan dollar and then a lower 48 dollar. There's only one United States dollar. So as a monetary phenomenon, it can't be different. But as a price phenomenon, it could. And I think Mihak did say that inflation in Alaska was no worse. In fact, if anything, it was slower than inflation in the rest of the country. Yeah. Here's the thing. I mean, I'm an economist. I'm supposed to be able to talk intelligently about this. Inflation isn't really what we all think of it as. It's much more complicated. Just because I give you a bunch of money, that doesn't necessarily cause inflation. Because especially if you haven't changed the total amount of money out there. If you haven't changed the total amount of money out there, you just redistribute it in some way and people are buying more and more things, it doesn't really have a fundamental change on the value of the money. Prices might go up because, let's say, the demand curve goes up. If you think of a demand curve and a supply curve crossing, anytime you increase demand, the equilibrium price should go up. So I actually think that's how we should think of the change that would occur from a UBI. It's not that all of a sudden the value of money would go down. Like the monetary supply would increase and therefore the value of $1 would go down. I don't think that's true. Rather, it would be a demand pressure on prices. You want to buy bicycles and they cost a certain amount, but more people have more money to spend on bicycles. That's going to drive the price up of bicycles. And so that would be possibly a real effect, even though we didn't see it in Alaska. But I do think that one is fair to think of it like as a demand side pressure up from prices.
I have a question.
Go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, I forgot it.
Oh.
Wow.
Mihak, you said that there was some study that said it would raise the debt 68%. That's actually enormous, isn't it? We
Yeah,
should
but
all,
the study had some really like big
yeah,
assumptions, which were not not realistic.
right. Well, well, isn't it more that they differ from your assumption? Your assumption is you can find a way to have UBI where it wouldn't raise the deficit, which is every year how much more you spend by that much. But
Yeah.
there's this fact about politics is that people in politics love to spend money, but they just don't love to raise taxes. It's always harder to raise taxes than it is to raise spending.
Actually,
And
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
okay.
Andrew Yang had one policy that said that it was kind of innovative policy that I have personally had never heard before. It said that every citizen would pay $100 for political campaigns, which is maybe I'm saying it incomplete, so that big corporations don't pay for politicians, and like so politicians don't have the support of big corporations anymore, and they do
Mhm.
not like support policies which are only for big corporations,
Yeah,
and they are able to raise taxes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, oh, because corporations have more money, they can pay more of it in taxes. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
I,
Uh,
I
Go
got
ahead.
it. Yeah. So how would people receive the money? Like, would it be mailbox, like a treasury?
Why
Check?
not direct deposit somewhere or check?
So what if someone's homeless?
They can still set up a direct deposit account, can't they? A bank account somewhere.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know, but I do want to mention that because it was something Peter said that it would be costly to set up the infrastructure for this type of program. Um, but my question to the whole class, not just Peter, is do you think actually setting up a UBI program would be more expensive than continuing to run the more means tested welfare programs that we have? As of right now, if you want unemployment insurance, if you want Medicaid, if you want food stamps, if you want the healthcare subsidies, there is actually a lot of paperwork and administrative stuff you have to go through. What do you think? If you got rid of all of that stuff, isn't paying people easy? Isn't just handing everybody a check something that's really easy to do? They did it for the coronavirus twice already, and they're probably going to do it a third time. I think it's actually pretty easy to just mail people checks or have them an account and give it to them. I don't know. What do you think about that? Would it be hard to set up a UBI system? Any opinions?
I don't think it would be hard necessarily to set up a UBI system. I do wonder though, like in terms of understanding like who gets taxed in order to pay for the UBI, like if that might be a little bit more expensive or costly to kind of fund and understand, if that makes sense.
Sure. And I think Mihak talked about this a bit, but who she talked about who would end up paying for it. And of course, the higher income people would end up paying for it. If you make more than $50,000, $100,000 per year, your taxes are going to go up because of this. Because it can't fully be offset by other revenue reductions. I just don't think that's feasible. If it costs trillions of dollars per year, you're not going to cut trillions of dollars out of the deficit. I'm sorry, out of the budget. So you're going to need to raise taxes. And so Dorian's point is, are taxes going to go up so much that this is actually worse for some people? I think the answer is yes. I think if you make more than $100,000, you may actually pay. You're getting money from the government in terms of UBI, but you're paying more in taxes than you previously were, and the net transfer. I think she had a graph where like the bottom decile and the top decile after all these transfers were worse off, right? Or
Yeah,
was
I
it
did have a graph, but
top two
even that
deciles?
had an assumption that all the major policies are repealed.
Yes, yes.
So
So
looking
yeah,
at that
was
chart, I also would think that there's some redistribution from the lower income brackets to some of the higher income brackets, even like excluding the bottom and the top. you've got, this is a little bit regressive too, that some people who would have been getting welfare benefits under the current programs would not be getting them and would get less under a
Very good point.
UBI.
Very good point. If this was like a mandate, nobody gets any more welfare programs and everybody gets the UBI instead. I think Charlotte made a great point that would actually could be regressive. It could be hurting these people. Let me just say, Andrew Yang has an opt-in UBI. So it's actually not universal. It says UBI, but he doesn't call it UBI. He calls it a freedom dividend. And the freedom dividend would be opt-in. So just like Charlotte is saying, if you wanted to keep the programs that you currently have, you could do that and not get the UBI. But still, it might, maybe you should think of it as they get to keep their current welfare programs and get a universal basic income on top of that. That would certainly alleviate your issue, right, Charlotte?
Yes, that would.
Yeah, that's a good point. And somebody said something in the chat too. This is, should I read one? Will this also make people have less incentive to work, and is this bad for our GDP? Very good question. What do you guys think? I was going to ask that. Would this actually make people less likely to work if they got a UBI? Imagine yourself. Let's say you graduate from college, and you get $1,000 per month from the government. Is that going to make you try not as hard to go find a job? What do you think? Anyone?
I kind of had the same question as Lauren. I was doing some reading, and just to me, I feel like it would give people less of an incentive to try, like, to go over the extra step to succeed, just because they're getting not a handout, but like the free money from the government. I feel like it would, I don't know, I feel like people just wouldn't work as hard as they do now to get where they are in the economy.
Okay.
I have a question about that. If we were to put in a UBI, everybody's getting $12,000 a year. That might push some people out of the labor market, but then wouldn't that cause wages to rise and entice people back into the labor market?
I think so. That's my personal opinion. So let me go with what Nick is saying right now. I mean, Christina, I got your point. I think, yes, it's very possible. Some people leave because I'll just take the free money. I don't want to work, or at least I'm not going to work as hard. But I think what Nick's point is that imagine all of the people out there who are working right now. They're working at a job that they really hate. They don't want to be working at this job. The hours are terrible. The pay is terrible. Their boss is terrible. The conditions are terrible. It's really inconvenient for them. Maybe they have children at home and they have to really search for daycare for their children, and it's not very good. And they're doing all of this just to keep this job, because if they don't, their lives are going to be just going to fall apart, be terrible. Imagine somebody like that having this lifeline of universal basic income. Their conditions, it's not just like, okay, now I have some extra money, but I still have to do all that other stuff. They could sort of use this as a bargaining power against their boss. If their boss is being a jerk to them, they could say, look, I need better conditions, I need better hours, or else I'm not going to keep this job. And now the boss's opinion has changed, where it used to be like, you got no other option, you have to take this job. Now they know there is another option, which is universal basic income. So all of this is to get to Nick's point, which is to say the working conditions would have to improve for this person. And that includes wages. He was really just talking about wages, but you have to offer that same person a higher wage to keep them working, because they're like right on the margin of whether I'm working here, and they have no other options, so they have to. But that is a way to keep wages low for employers. That would just disappear if you had UBI. Now you have to give, it's kind of like a minimum wage, right? You have to give people at least a high enough wage that they prefer working to just collecting the UBI. And you might think, well, this is bad. You have fewer people working at these lousy jobs. But do we really want all these people working these jobs and not forcing the businesses to change the way they hire people to make it more of a better job to have in the first place. So I guess I agree with Nick's point that this, in addition to UBI, there could be this beneficial effect on the labor market for everybody, not just for the people who take the UBI, but for everybody.
So can
Peter.
I add something to that?
Okay, well, Peter had his hand up for a
Oh,
while.
yeah.
Maybe I
Yeah.
should go to him.
Yeah, okay.
You were waiting patiently, Peter, so let's hear what you had to say.
I was just gonna say to that last point, because of globalization, the ability of businesses to simply move overseas to cheaper labor markets has almost, I mean, it's completely eliminated unions in the United States for the most part.
For the most part.
And so I don't necessarily think having UBI would, I mean, it would certainly help people to argue for themselves a bit better, but a lot of businesses, they care more about their margins.
Yeah, so you're thinking of manufacturing and other types of jobs that can be outsourced. But a lot of service jobs can't be. Now, they could be automated, some service jobs, but I don't think most service jobs in this country can be out unless it's like over the phone or something like that. So yes and no. And I also think that these jobs that could be outsourced, it's already happening. There are places in this country, I mean, the wage in this country to us might seem low, like a $7.25 per hour. That's still way higher than in Bangladesh or Vietnam or places in the country, in the world, that have just an excess supply of labor. So yes, I take your point. The businesses of this country aren't going to just simply give everybody a higher wage and make the conditions great for nothing. Some of them are going to fight back against this, but in my opinion, universal basic income gives some bargaining power to workers that they otherwise wouldn't have. Yeah, good points though. Somebody else had their hand up. We only got a few more minutes, but we should wrap it up. Does anybody want to talk? Mihak, did you have anything?
I think Nick has something to say.
Go ahead,
Maybe you
Nick,
can go first.
if you want
Yeah.
it.
One of the things in the, I guess, did I say this in the chat? Maybe I did. No, I didn't. One of the things in Yang's proposal that made me think about, like, the way that we fund this could have ancillary positive effects that might be harder to quantify, but would show up in a big way down the road. Like a carbon tax was one of the ways that he funded the freedom dividend. So that would also help correct a negative externality, eventually, saving us.
Yeah, I agree. Sure. That's just packaging it together with other good things. What do you guys think about stay-at-home moms? The work that they do right now, the market says that is worth $0. If you're a stay-at-home mom, if you're an artist and you're creating something, you get pennies for it. You might get some advertising dollars on YouTube, but it's like really, really close to nothing. The UBI is a way to just encourage people to do these other sorts of jobs that right now the market values at $0. The stay-at-home mother, her dollar value contribution is $0. She gets no compensation for that. But maybe we could think of that as a benefit we actually want to value in society. And UBI is a way to support people while they're doing that, while they're staying home.
Or it could be more targeted.
Could be targeted. Yeah. That's always the other side of the option is why make it universal? Why not targeted income? And that is a good point. Some economists, this is my last point, I'm running out of time. You've heard of like this welfare cliff where the benefits you get from the welfare suddenly drop off. So you don't want to earn more than a certain amount because then you lose all your benefits. Well, one benefit of the UBI is that there is no cliff. There is no point where if you make too much, you lose it. And that actually could incentivize people to go out and work more than if they have a big welfare cliff that says, well, if I make too much, I'm going to lose my welfare benefits. Therefore, I'm not going to work too much. So that's a response to not making it too much means tested, like you say. If you make it too means tested, then you get right back to the problem of having a welfare cliff. But that's it. Anybody else want to say anything, or you want to tell me, did anyone change their mind? Somebody who was a for, be against, or against be a for, undecideds? Did you decide, you undecideds? There were a lot of undecideds. What do you think now, undecideds? Put in the chat, or what do you want to say? You got anybody here a fan of Star Trek? I mean, we know what Star Trek is. Have you thought about the way money works in Star Trek? There's no money. Nobody's working for money. Star Trek has developed the technology to be able to produce things, produce goods instantly. They have like a replicator. That's a great technology, isn't it? If we had the technology just to say, you know, Jean-Luc Picard says Earl Grey tea hot, and bam, it appears. That's a great technology. Wouldn't we want that technology to exist in real life rather than say, okay, now this technology just puts everybody out of work, where in case it would be bad. My point is that automation should be a good thing. If we can have robots do stuff for us, we can have artificial intelligence do stuff for us, that should be a good thing. But if we're living in an economic system where all of the benefits of that automation go to whatever sort of rich sector has the capital to invest in it and to profit from it, then everybody else, all the people who are really thin on that wealth income line, are going to be hurt by this automation. Wouldn't it be awful if somebody invented something like a replicator, like in Star Trek, and then it just put the entire food service industry out of work and everybody was poor because of it and our lives became miserable? The only point of this anecdote is to think maybe when technology changes, our economic system has to change too to accompany it. And they did it in Star Trek. You like Star Trek and you watch Star Trek, they solved this problem of what do we do about the poor people once we get great technology? And their solution was, we make people care about their status, you know, as a captain, as an ensign in Starfleet. That's what people care about. It's no longer, are you rich or are you poor? It's about what's your status in society? And that still incentivizes people to work and do a good job with whatever it is they're supposed to do. Anyways, end of my Star Trek rant. Thank you guys for participating in the class today. Futurama, ooh, that's another good one. What do they do? Do they have money in Futurama? They do, they do. We should talk about that, Philip, to see what's the economy of Futurama like. Okay, you guys have anything else? We'll have our next quiz on Tuesday, but that's it. Thank you and have a good weekend. Thank you to our debaters.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, have a good day.
Thank you.
Philip, do you really want to talk?
Thank you.
We don't have to.
We can talk about it another time. I got to get to my other class.
All right. See you later.